In the early backyard light, you lean over the garden bed with a pair of pruning shears and clip away one yellowed leaf. The blades close with a soft click, and the damp air carries that small sound farther than it should. From the outside, it can look like a lonely little ritual, or just a way to fill time when the house has grown quieter. But for many older adults, this is not really about the leaf. It is one of the few moments in the day when the nervous system finally stops bracing, and something inside settles back into place. So if the garden is doing more than growing plants, what exactly is it restoring in you? And then something quieter starts to show up on the patio. You move from pot to pot with the watering can, stopping at one curled leaf, touching it lightly, then turning the container a few inches toward the sun. Nothing dramatic happens, and that is part of why it works. Out here, the pace is slow, clear, and easy to trust. You are not managing voices, expectations, or the invisible strain of being read by other people. Each small task begins, ends, and leaves behind a visible sign that something is a little better than it was a minute ago. The calm does not come from escaping people. It comes from being in a place where your mind is not being pulled out of shape. And that is only the visible layer. What makes this habit feel so necessary did not appear out of nowhere. For many people, it was shaped over years of being the one who kept life moving, the one who handled schedules, solved problems, remembered what mattered, and made sure the day held together. Then the rhythm changes. The children are grown, the job is over, the house gets quieter, and the emptiness does not arrive like a crisis. It arrives in smaller ways, through all the places that no longer need you in quite the same form. So you open the back door, pull on your gloves, and press the loose soil back around the base of a plant as if you were setting something familiar right again. That habit carries a strength. You still know how to tend, protect, and keep watch. But it also carries a cost. The harder part comes later. That is where the habit stops looking simple. At the potting bench, you press fresh soil into a seed tray with 2 fingers, firm but unhurried, making each row even without needing to think about it. What this reveals is not just preference, but a kind of quiet strength that took years to build. You know how to maintain something. You know how to notice small changes before they turn into bigger problems. You know how to stay patient with what grows slowly. And because of that, the garden becomes more than a place you visit. It becomes a place marked by your timing, your attention, your standards, your care. There is authorship in that, a private proof that you can still shape the physical world in a meaningful way. But any pattern that steadies you this deeply can ask something back. The more private layer usually shows up later in the day. By late afternoon, you may find yourself in the backyard with one hand resting on the rake handle, scanning the edges for one more thing to trim, straighten, or clear before going inside. The problem is not the work itself. The problem is that when someone has learned to feel steady by tending, fixing, and putting things back in order, stillness can begin to feel strangely exposed. That habit holds a strength. It gives shape to the day and turns care into something visible. But it also carries a cost. Sometimes usefulness becomes the only condition under which you fully trust your own okayness. And when sadness, longing, or emptiness rises, it can feel easier to turn it into a task than to call it by its real name. And this is where people often read it wrong. This is where the inner experience runs straight into the way other people see it. From the kitchen, someone calls your name, and you keep tying the tomato vine to its stake without answering right away. To them, it may look like withdrawal. It may look like you would rather be with the plants than with the family. But what is actually happening is much harder to notice from across a doorway. Out there, you are not disappearing. You are returning to your proper size. The garden gives you a rhythm that lowers the strain, steadies the mind, and lets you come back into yourself without having to explain it. That is a real strength. The cost is that it can be mistaken for distance, coldness, or refusal. The outer habit stays the same, but the reason under it shifts. And this is where the meaning changes. For many older adults, the garden is not simply a love of nature in the abstract. It is one of the few places where their value still becomes visible. You water and something responds. You tend and something stands a little straighter because you were there. You pick up a broken leaf, smooth it once in your palm, and drop it into the compost, as if even what has failed can still become useful again. That is why gardening alone can feel so necessary. It is not just rest. It is repair with your hands, when life no longer offers as many obvious ways to feel needed. And in that ordinary exchange between effort and growth, dignity comes back in a form you can actually see. Sometimes the garden is not only where they heal, but where they hide from what feels harder to name. That does not make the habit false. It means the garden is carrying feelings that words still cannot hold. The problem is not that they go out there alone, but that it may become the only place they let themselves feel okay. Some people do not go out to the garden to avoid life. They go there so they can return to it in one piece. On the porch step, you brush the dirt from your gloves, sit down for a minute, and look across the line of pots the way you look at something that has traveled through more than one season with you. From the outside, they see a person watering plants. What is actually happening is quieter and far more personal. Someone is restoring their nervous system, their pace, and their sense of being useful in the world they still belong to. What they want understood is not, leave me alone. It is, do not confuse the place where I recover with the place where I hide. The garden is where I come back to myself. So return to that early morning bed of plants and the pruning shears in your hand. At first, they look like a tool inside a quiet routine. One more sign, perhaps, that you preferred the company of leaves to the company of people. But by now, the meaning has changed. When you cut away what is withered, you are not only caring for the garden, you are also keeping your inner life from growing over with all the things no one else can see. The shears keep time for something larger than maintenance. They keep time for dignity, authorship, and a form of independence that still feels alive in your own hands. And that is why the garden never was just a backdrop. It has been one of the places where you still recognize yourself. If this fear has been living quietly underneath it all, it may not really be a fear of being alone. It may be a fear of becoming less real to yourself after so much of life has changed shape. And that is why this habit matters. The pull toward the garden is not always a flaw, and not always an escape. Sometimes it is simply a signal that a part of you still needs a place where care, steadiness, and usefulness can be felt again in the most ordinary, honest way.